All right, AP European History students, I'm going to be making a video, and actually I think I'm going to break it up into two segments this time to cover chapter 23, so you don't have to read it. You're welcome. The video segments will be broken up. The first half will deal with the like brief Second Industrial Revolution into the changes that occurred in the cities and having to do with layout and architecture and some of the new technology in the cities, and then also the different class structures. So talking about the upper class and the middle class and kind of the different lifestyles of those groups of people in the working class in the cities. And then the second video that you need to watch will hopefully be relatively short and deal with the science during this time period and some of those changes, and then also what else was I going to put in? Oh, I'm going to talk about realism as a literary movement kind of in response to Romanticism. So you had Romanticism in response to Classicism, and now you're having realism in response to Romanticism. I'm sure there are more isms in your life that you would love to talk about, but so that's where we're going. Hopefully it'll work out. So again, you're going to probably have to watch two short video segments, and my goal is to keep it to less than 30 minutes total. 20 minutes would be ideal, wouldn't it? All right, I'll do my best. Okay, bye.
All right, guys, welcome to Chapter 23, Life in Emerging Urban Society in the 19th Century. Yes, this is not exactly the lady who's on the front of your book. It's a different edition, but you get the point. It's from your textbook. So you're going to get to avoid reading the Chapter 23, and I'm going to go over the most important points right now. So let's get started. So the first thing you need to know is that, and we've talked about this before, that the Second Industrial Revolution occurred at the last half of the 19th century. So the late 1800s is essentially the Second Industrial Revolution. The First Industrial Revolution, of course, occurred between 1780 and 1850 and was focused on textiles, coal, iron, and the start of railroads. But railroads and the steel rails and all those things that come with it that make the railroads really important are really part of the Second Industrial Revolution. So my tendency is the start of the railroads occurred during the First Industrial Revolution, but its predominance and its ability to move materials around and just be part of people's life is not really until the Second Industrial Revolution. So there are four major aspects of the Second Industrial Revolution. First, steel production. This was allowed because of the Bessemer process, which resulted in high quality steel that could be kind of depended on. Before that, it was very expensive to create steel. Second aspect is oil, kerosene for lighting, internal combustion engine for factory machines. The third is electricity. It increasingly powered cities. England's going to build its first electrical power station in 1881. And then steel, textile, and shoemaking and construction of industries will be increasingly using electricity in the latter part of the 19th century. And the last, which is going to be very important coming into the 20th century, is Germany's focus on developing chemicals. So it led to photo processes and other areas such as dyes, soaps, and pharmaceuticals. Also, fertilizers are going to be created that are going to improve farming techniques. But most importantly, you're going to have explosives that are going to be created that are going to have a huge impact in the devastation that occurred during World War I. So the Second Industrial Revolution, again, resulted in an expansion of industry and technology, and it created a demand for new experts with specialized knowledge. Science is going to become closely connected to technology. There will be new professionals in areas such as engineering, architecture, chemistry, accounting, and surveying. And then because large public and private institutions are created, you're going to see the development of a management class. They will later be called white-collared workers. Another significant thing coming out of the Second Industrial Revolution is a change in nations and the power of a nation. So by 1890, Germany, which will at that time be unified, so we're almost there, but by 1890, Germany is going to become the most powerful industrial nation in Europe, and that they will actually surpass Great Britain. So Britain actually had to have a huge investment in the technology and developing it in the trial and error process, whereas Germany's going to come along and really just adapt the technology that Great Britain had already developed. So the actual expense of industrialization in Germany was not as great, and so they're able to just improve and go past Great Britain and other countries such as Belgium and the United States, though, is still very powerful, but they are not obviously in Europe. The other thing you need to know is that Germany is going to focus a lot of its new industrialization on state-of-the-art technology. Specifically, they're going to be working with power generators and organic chemicals. Another thing that you need to understand about the Second Industrial Revolution is the impact that it had on how people lived. So industrialization during this time period is going to continue to attract huge numbers of workers to the cities. By 1900, actually, over half of the industrial workers in Britain, Germany, and Belgium will work for companies with more than 20 workers. So you're going to start to see this growth of the larger company. Population growth is going to be experienced specifically in urban areas. Over 50% of the population in 1891 is going to live in the city. London was by far the largest city in Europe during this time. The population of Europe is actually going to increase by 50% between 1870 and 1914. And by 1900, you have 9 European cities with populations over a million. This is the result of a couple different things: significant decline in mortality rates, especially among children. And the birth rates are actually going to fall during this time period because of contraception and things like that, which actually started in France. But because more children live longer and actually make it to adulthood, you're going to see an increase in population. You're also going to have better medical knowledge and nutrition that are going to allow the population to grow. The number of children per family will actually fall during this time period and you're going to see this trend more pronounced in the middle class. So here you can see the European cities that are going to be growing. You notice that a lot of the cities are in the industrial areas of Germany and in Great Britain. You have some in Spain, in France, northern Italy, and then fewer and fewer as you go to southern and eastern Europe. So the next big issue that comes out of this time period is a public health movement. As more and more people are experiencing the negative effects of urbanization, you're going to have leaders who are going to seek to remedy the high disease and mortality rates that are occurring in cities. And you can see here, looking at Manchester, that people in professional trades and even Leeds, these are industrial areas, but if you're in a professional trade, you live longer. But look at the laborers. I mean, laborers in Manchester, average life expectancy is 17 years. So you guys are almost finished. So be happy you're in school. So Edwin Chadwick is going to be a major reformer for living conditions in cities, and he actually is going to be influenced by a guy by the name of Jeremy Bentham, who was a utilitarianist. Jeremy Bentham believed that the greatest good was for the greatest number of people, and so Edwin Chadwick is going to agree and suggest that more people will be better off if death and disease is decreased, and he thought the primary cause of poverty was death and disease. So this is Edwin Chadwick. He came up with the idea of sanitation, and he believed most diseases could be prevented if you would just clean up the urban environment. So stop putting poop everywhere and pick up that excrement, clean the water, and he also said that it would be more cost efficient. He said it would cost you about 20% less if you figured out a sewer system than trying to remove the feces and all the nasty stuff by hand. So he really thought that you could improve people's lives by cleaning up the environment. So Chadwick's ideas had a great effect. And Britain is going to pass its first public health law in 1848. And Germany and France are also going to adopt, and the United States are going to adopt some of Chadwick's ideas. So by 1860, and in some European cities 1870, they've made some significant progress with public sanitation, with sewer systems and clean water. So the world has changed. Next, another big significant change as a result of the Industrial Revolution, but also new ideas about how cities should be laid out, you're going to have a focus on urban planning and public transportation. So everybody's in cities, they're going to try to figure out better ways to have some open space for people eventually, and also have ways for people to get around and also for troops to get around. So you're going to have a guy by the name of George von Haussmann. He's going to redevelop Paris. He's going to put in some wide boulevards, which you can see here. Again, a couple different reasons for that, but one of them was political, making it easier to take care of rowdy citizens by being able to get troops in there instead of having barricades put up all over the city. But also better middle class living accommodations. So the middle class are going to start creating housing kind of on the outskirts of the city. They're going to demolish some of the slums in order to put in some parks and some open spaces. So you're also going to have a new system of aqueducts to double fresh water supply and some underground sewers. Again, these things are going to help to eliminate some of the epidemics, including some of the cholera epidemics in 1832 and 1849 that Europe experienced. Cities such as Vienna, Cologne, and Paris are going to take the lead in this area. In addition to redesigning the layout of cities, and you can see the modernization of Paris here, and this is also in your textbook if you want to look at it, is, oops, I don't have it on here, is mass transportation. So you're going to see the development of the electric streetcar, which is going to help to set up that whole middle class living on the outskirts of the city, and they'll take the streetcar into the city. So you've got really your first suburbs developing during this time period. Electricity led to the creation of London's subway system in the 1860s, and then Paris's metro in the 1900s. So by 1900, only about 9% of Britain's urban population was actually overcrowded, which meant that there were more than 2 people per room. So you really see an improvement in the urban living during this time period. You're also going to see significant migration to cities from the countryside continuing during this time period. Huge numbers of Southern and Eastern Europeans are going to migrate to America in the 1880s. You're also going to see that a lot of these Southern Europeans are going to go to Canada and even Latin America. Jews in Eastern Europe are going to flee persecution and be coming to the West. And in some areas, agricultural changes are going to force people to search for new opportunities. So again, that whole enclosure movement that had led to large land holdings, and so those subsistent farmers are going to be kind of pushed off, and they're going to have to figure out a different way to make their livelihood. So the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is social structure and the changes as a result of the Industrial Revolution and urbanization. And the first thing you need to know is that standard of living is going to increase for a majority of people by the second half of the 19th century. So you're seeing the improvements or the benefits of the Industrial Revolution, but it doesn't come for a while. So the gap, though, between the wealthy and the working class is still pretty huge. This period is called the Golden Age for the middle class, but in Britain, you're going to see on this distribution or Lorenz curve that you can see the economic inequality is pretty great. So ideally, you have 1% of the population, they would have 1% of the wealth. That would be totally equal. Well, in this situation in Britain, you have the 5% of the population controlling 43% of the wealth. So that shows you a really extreme inequality with regard to the distribution of income. So you have a small group of people controlling most of the wealth. You can see that in Prussia and even in Denmark that is a little less. So ideally, if you were going to have equality, the curve would be straight here, but the inequality you can see here. And if it was absolute inequality, that would be very bad. It would be down here. So there's inequality, but the middle class is doing better. So you're going to see also that there's going to be an expansion of industry and technology that's going to create experts and specialized knowledge. Again, those engineers and all those new jobs are actually going to develop a middle class. So you're going to see there's also distinct differences within the middle class between the upper, who are the extremely wealthy, and then the middle and lower middle classes. And then, of course, you have the working class down here. But there's definitely an urban hierarchy within the city. You still have the aristocracy up here. They're going to try to keep their differences so that they aren't associating with the middle class, but eventually they'll have to. So let's talk a little bit about the diversity within the middle class. So the middle class bourgeoisie, as we'll call them, is about 15 to 20% of the population in Western Europe, but it's less in Eastern Europe, with only about 2% in Russia, because the nobles are still dominating business. The upper middle class would essentially be bankers, industrial leaders, large-scale commerce, top government officials. These are the people with money. They would often employ several servants in their house. Then you have the middle class, which would be the smaller businessmen, professionals, merchants, doctors, lawyers, civil servants, and they'd employ at least one servant as a cook and maid. Then you have what's called the petite bourgeoisie, or the lower middle class. They would be independent shopkeepers, small merchants, store managers, minor civil servants, teachers, clerks, and some master craftsmen, such as goldsmiths. This group is going to grow from about 7% to about 20% in 1900. Women worked as department store clerks, stenographers, secretaries, waitresses, and nurses. But women primarily held clerical jobs. They held more than half of the post office and government clerical jobs in 1911. Women did. So the main characteristics of the middle class: they believed strongly, we talked about this before, in classical liberalism and sought to protect property above all things in constitutional assemblies, i.e. the British Parliament, the French Chamber of Deputies. They gained political influence through increased land ownership and that was tied to voting rights. They emphasized individual liberty and respectability based on economic success. So I think I just had one other thing to say about the characteristics of the middle class. For instance, the families would emphasize frugality and planning for the future, and education and religion are going to be extremely important, and they will have strong nationalistic feelings. So again, classical liberalism, increased voting rights, emphasis on economic success, frugality and planning, and a focus on the importance of religion and nationalism are all important characteristics of the middle class during this time period. So you can see with some of these visuals that the middle class like to spend some time doing leisure activities, and they spent most of their income actually on food. In fact, 25% of the middle class's income was spent on food. Food, if you add together servants, food and servants, 50% of the income of the middle class was spent on food and servants. They also spent a lot of money on consumer items, so women focusing on dress, different types of dress here. And then they like to treat their children to the refinements of life. They would focus on educating them in music with pianos. They would allow their children to go on what are called grand tours, essentially touring Europe. And then also they would do balls. So again, an attempt to be aristocrats or nobility, but obviously that was something they couldn't have because they didn't have the title, but they definitely had the money. So looking back again at the working class. So the working class, again, is still 80% of the population. Many were peasants and hired hands, especially in Eastern Europe. They are less unified and homogenous compared to the middle classes, so they're very diverse. Highly skilled workers were at the top of the laboring class, and they were considered the labor aristocracy. Construction bosses, foremen, highly skilled craftsmen. So just kind of a picture here of the labor aristocracy. So they were also, could be semi-skilled workers, bricklayers, successful factory workers. Unskilled workers and domestic servants were at the bottom of the unskilled here, were at the bottom half of the working class. These were oftentimes working women who were domestic servants in England. In fact, over half of all working women in England in the 1900s were domestic servants. And then still, just so you know, children comprised about 14%. Excuse me, I said compromised. I meant comprised about 14% of the workers in the British textile factories in 1874. So children are still working and should be. Before we end this section on the new class system in the urban centers, I just wanted to go over quickly kind of the changing family structure during this time period and what people did in their free time. So just so you know, the religion was very important with the middle class, but the lower middle class or the working class, church attendance was not as important. And a lot of that had to do with the conservative nature of the churches and what they promoted and how they sided on the side of the wealthy oftentimes, plus that there were not enough churches to keep up with the demand. They were built in such a way that they really didn't have churches close by for people in the cities. Also, just to kind of go over again what was going on with the family, romantic love is going to start to become an important reason for marriage by the 1850s. You're going to see, because of the rising standard of living, a lot of people who are younger are going to be able to marry. Economic status is still important for the middle class. Even after the 1850s, middle class females were monitored extremely closely by their parents. Chastity was very important. Middle class boys were not monitored nearly as much. You're going to have a high rate of the high rate of illegitimacy is going to decrease after the 1850s, and that is possible because oftentimes you're going to have people marrying younger. So fidelity in marriage was very important in the middle class, so that meant that you were faithful. You're also going to see that after the 1850s, work of most wives was increasingly distinct and separate from their husbands. So they have women's work, and that is very different from like the cottage industry, when oftentimes wives would work with their husbands together. So you're going to start to see different spheres, or what we call the domestic sphere for women, and then the public sphere for men. Child rearing is going to become the focus of a woman's job in the home, and middle class women are going to organize and resist their second class status to their husbands, and they're going to start to demand access to higher education. And they wanted to repeal some of the laws that denied women property ownership rights. So you're going to see a growing feminism during this time period. You're going also to have lower mortality rates for children, the result of parents becoming more emotionally involved. New mothers are going to increasingly breastfeed their children. Fewer children are going to be abandoned to foundling hospitals. Married couples are actually going to decrease the number of children they have, and therefore spend more time with the ones they do have. There's also books published on child rearing, and in working class families, working class children did not remain economically dependent on their parents. Boys and girls went to work when they reached adolescence. Young working class adolescents broke away from the family more easily when emotional ties became oppressive. So in the 20th century, middle class youth are going to follow this pattern also. But originally, the middle class children were much more connected to their parents than the working class, who had to kind of move on more quickly. Also, just a last few things on leisure, what people spent their time doing. So sports is going to attract an increasing number of spectators during this time period. You're also going to see sports clubs, soccer, rugby, huge bicycle craze in Western Europe in the 1890s, so bicycling is going to become very important. And then you're going to see cafes and taverns and department stores, which were frequented by middle class people. In Paris, you're going to see dance halls, concerts, and plays that are going to draw a lot of people. So lots of new things. The working class, however, is going to spend their leisure time a little differently. They're going to spend their time drinking. They will go to spectator sports, music halls. There is actually going to be a decline in some of the cruel sports like boxing and stuff like that. But gambling is also going to be important for the working class people. So a little bit different type of how to have fun for the working class people versus the middle class people. So that's it for this section of the video. Remember to watch the second section as well.